Everyone, hi. We have with us Dr. David Sinclair, biologist, professor of genetics, and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center of the Biology of Aging at Harvard Medical School. In 2014, Dr. Sinclair was included in Time 100 as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And in 2019, he was in the Time magazine's 50 most influential people in healthcare. David, it's a pleasure to see you, and welcome to Digital Days 2020 in Switzerland.
Thanks, Boris. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. David, for some of our viewers who might not yet be familiar with your work on the information theory of aging, or have not yet read your book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, could you please explain in a nutshell what your research is about?
So for about 25 years, I've been trying to understand why do we get old? Or in other words, why do we get sick? And what we've understood is that there are changes to the body that actually cause aging. And we think this is one of the main causes of aging. And Boris, as you said, it's a loss of information. So what type of information are we talking about? Well, there are two types of information. There's the DNA molecule, which is the genome. But there's this other type of information that's just as important that controls how the genes and the DNA is expressed or read on, off, on, off. And these are the on-off switches, similar to the software of a computer. And I think, and some of my colleagues also agree, that it's this loss of information at what's called the epigenetic level. In other words, the software of our bodies becomes corrupt, even though the hardware is still largely intact.
Very, very interesting. And given those parallels with hardware and software, and given we're going to grow older in a digital age, what do you think are some of the new and different challenges that you think we will face in this era, David?
Well, one of the big challenges is to have aging recognized by the world and first of all, the medical profession and regulators as something that's treatable. In my book, I talk about aging being referred to as a treatable disease. And you might think, well, aging isn't a disease, of course. Everybody gets aging. But if you take out the fact that it's very common, it's exactly the same as a disease. It's a decline in function over time. And so I've written a lot about why we should try to tackle aging and not just one disease at a time. Give you an example. If we cured all of cancer today, we still, on average, would only live about 2 years longer, which some people might think is a lot, but I don't think that's a lot. And I think that if we can slow down all aspects of aging, we could prevent and treat cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, frailty, most diseases, even COVID-19. And that could extend lifespan by decades.
That's amazing, and that's extremely exciting. How do you think might digitization be helpful and might assist in making these things happen?
Well, we use bioinformatics all the time in my field of genetics. These days, if you don't use bioinformatics and supercomputers, you just can't compete. We get terabytes of data every day now. And what we're doing is we're reading the genome, the DNA, but we have information that's on the DNA. There are chemicals that modify the DNA that we have to read, and we can use those chemicals to determine somebody's biological age, not just their chronological age, their birthday candles. And so you might actually be older than your age or younger than your age, and we can tell that now using machine learning technology. The other thing that we're very excited about is electronic medical records, but in a different way that's personalized and tied to artificial intelligence. So for at least the last 7 years, I've had blood tests, right? And that data has gone into a system, and using artificial intelligence, I'm getting feedback on how to be healthy, what to do, what to eat, and try and optimize my biological age and my overall health so that I don't just live longer, but the reason that I live longer is because I'm not getting sick. And that is the wave of the future. And then one last thing I want to say, which, Boris, you probably don't even know about me. I do mention it a little bit in the book, is that I started a company out of my lab to take DNA out of the body, whether it's a blood test or a mouth swab, or a cough, you can cough. And we test the DNA and we can see everything that's not human. So we see COVID-19, of course, but we see everything else that's infecting the body. And in this way, we can get results within minutes, one day. But also we don't have to guess what's wrong with us. We just have the DNA tell us what's wrong.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like at very many levels, technology and digitization are helping speed up the process, helping monitor, helping actually facilitate the next stages of your research and development, David.
Oh, yes. Most of biology these days is electronic. Actually, in terms of time spent, we could do one experiment that would take maybe 2 weeks, but we can then spend the next 3 months analyzing the data we get.
Are there any particular challenges that you're seeing to the work that you're doing during this pandemic, and how the pandemic has changed your use of technology?
Well, it's definitely challenging. My lab and most labs at Harvard Medical School are doing shift work because we cannot fit people next to each other. So it slowed things down a bit. But we're also able to do work from home using computers, bioinformatics, which is very helpful. What have we changed since the pandemic? Well, we've ramped up the work on viruses, both in the company that I started called ArcBio, but also in the lab, we're doing a lot more bioinformatic work on viruses and try to understand how aging and viruses affect each other. We know that older people are susceptible to COVID-19 more than young people. And the work that we're doing on aging, we think, may be a large part of understanding why older people die more often when they become infected.
That's outstanding. And there's such immense potential, obviously, during these unusual times if this work is successful. David, in terms of the current times at the global conferences prior to the pandemic, there was a big theme of focusing on healthcare, i.e. preventative medicine, and not what some people think is the current system of sick care. You're dealing with prevention of aging. What are your thoughts on the medicines and healthcare of the future and what it's going to look like?
It's going to be radically different. Right now, there are two problems. One is that there's the wrong mindset. As I mentioned, a lot of doctors, most doctors will treat diseases often when it's too late. And with the wrong mindset, doctors are not inclined to try and prevent you from getting aging. The second is that we don't have a lot of technology. Right now, even if doctors wanted to slow aging, they only have a couple of things they can do, and they can advise to eat less often and do exercise. But in the future, 10, 15 years from now, doctors will have the knowledge and the tools to be able to give a 40, 50-year-old a weekly or even a daily medicine that would delay the aging process so that you don't get cancer in your 70s, you don't have a heart attack in your 80s or dementia in your 90s. And if you don't get sick, you live longer. Yes. So this is the approach to medicine of the future. It's very similar to 100 years ago where, we didn't understand cancer, we didn't understand infection very well. And doctors would say, okay, there's not much we can do. We can cut it out, we can cut off a limb, but go home and get your things in order. Once we understood that it's bacteria you can kill and that you can actually treat cancer with medicines, we started to treat these really like things that are not necessarily a death sentence. And aging is like that. We're slowly understanding that we can push it further out and we can actually do something about it.
And as you've mentioned earlier, we both have libraries behind us, so knowledge is power, right?
Well, it is. And one of the big breakthroughs in the field, and we also work on this, we have some work that will be coming out soon, is not just about slowing aging, it's about reversing it. And remember that the information I was talking about, the epigenetic information, the software, we've discovered a way to safely reboot the computer, to restore the software of the body. And in the case of mice, which we use as model systems in the lab, we can reboot the eyeball and get old mice to have their vision back after being blind. And That's just the beginning of a world where we can not just slow down sickness, but actually take someone who's old I think, and make their body younger again.
That's fascinating, especially with ophthalmology and eye care being one of the more complicated clinical trial models, from what I understand, and an eye being such a complicated, smaller organ, and you're already working with that model.
Yeah, well, it has some advantages. You can go quicker into clinical trials, and also if it's something that could potentially be dangerous, like a gene therapy, the eye is a closed system, so it's not as dangerous. But the good thing about the eye that we've discovered is that it's fixable, that the nerve cells at the back of the eye are not all dead. They've just lost their way. They've lost their software. And if you can reboot them, then the eye works almost perfectly again. So we're very excited about the eye. We hope to do clinical trials in less than 2 years from now in humans with a gene therapy to the eye. We want to treat glaucoma, which is pressure-induced damage to the eye.
Yes.
But eventually, we could use this knowledge to treat, theoretically, any part of the body, the liver, the skin, the heart, and rejuvenate those tissues so that, every 10 years you go back and you have a new treatment and you keep repeating that process.
That is just so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, David. And then in addition to the advances in healthcare and medicine, how do you think more broadly about our society? How do you think, and what do you think is your personal wish for the digital future?
Well, I think the digital future is already here, and it's very hard to extrapolate because we've gone exponential. When it comes to healthcare, which is really my expertise, what we're seeing is a convergence of two examples of exponential growth. And when exponential meets exponential, then it's really hard to predict where we're going because things will go faster than we can even dream. And our ability to measure the body, to measure the DNA, and to use that with digital health and AI, machine learning processes, and the gathering of millions of people's data and genomes anonymously if you want, although we can talk about security later, that's one issue. But all of this data coming together, and actually the ability to read the genome of a human is becoming cheaper faster than Silicon Valley and the microchip industry was growing in the 1980s and 90s. $1 billion 20 years ago is now $100. So that gives you an idea of what's going on in my field. So the digital future is that we have devices, we have implants, we have telehealth, and that our bodies will be treated more like we treat our cars. We monitor them, we have a dashboard, we can see what's going on, and we can optimize them as we're driving.
We live in fascinating times. David, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. Thank you on behalf of Digital Days 2020 in Switzerland.
You're welcome. It's been great to be here. Thanks, Boris.